Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. It's an intense pleasure to welcome you at the INSA Versailles tonight. Welcome to the first lecture of the series Ce que les monstres ont à nous dire, What Monsters Have to Tell Us, that we imagined as a preview of the White Week 2026 with the curators Léa Mosconi and Henri Bonny. This series and the White Week is about the figure of the monster in architecture. How can the monster help us to design an architecture of the otherness, of the encounter? The White Week 2026 will take place in January from the 26th to the 13th. The other lectures will follow the 2nd December with Léa Hobson, who is an architect and an activist, and Emanuele Coccia, a philosopher. Tonight, we welcome Alessandra Covini from the Studio Ossidiana with the lecture The Design of the Encounter. In a few words, Studio Ossidiana is a design practice based in Rotterdam, working across the scale of architecture and design, engaging with space, objects, materials, installation, and landscapes. The studio's project include experimental playgrounds for children and adults, floating gardens inhabited by birds, outdoor kitchen and large art pavilion on water, and lots of other amazing projects. Studio Ossidiana has exhibited in international shows and events, including the 23rd Triennale of Milano, la Biennale di Venezia, and at Centre Pompidou in Paris. The format of the presentation is 1 hour, then a moment of exchange of questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Then we will invite you to continue the discussion outside with some snacks and drinks. Thank you, Alexandra. We wish you a good lecture. And
thank you so much for... Oh, you go.
Yeah, I would just...
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, just... just to few words to tell why we are so pleased to have Alessandra with us, and also first we would like to thank the Architecture School of Versailles, Alice Grégoire also, who helped us curate these lectures, and the students also for their presence and help. The monster is a very polysemic term. The notion for us is essential, and we want to, well, the sense we use for the monster is something we cannot understand. So it's very wide. Yet what we find very interesting about the monster is that we can't understand it, yet its presence. It's present and we can feel its presence. So we believe it's an important figure to bring in the field of architecture, because it helps us address 3 questions that we believe are very important for us architects. First is that the monster questions the transgression of normativity. This specific topic will be developed by Emanuele Coccia during the last lecture of this cycle. Then the second subject is the question of the complicated heritage of modernity. We had the chance to talk about this subject with Bruno Latour, and this meeting with Bruno Latour is the one that brought us to the subject of the monster. So he invites us to love our monsters. He says we created complicated things, so he talks about the different hybrids, and his point is that we at one point stopped loving these creations, and today we must address these creations to help them go through the years. And this subject will be presented by Léa Hobson, who made this research about the concrete. So this will be the second lecture. And today we have the chance to have Alessandra with us, and to address the third question, which is the question of cohabitation. We are not alone in the cities, and we have to look at these other occupants of architecture. So we are very honored to have Alessandra, who represents the Studio Ossidiana, with us, because in the Studio Ossidiana they precisely experiment on the animal territories. The images Alessandra will show you tonight show a very interesting contradiction. Well, this is my lecture, my interpretation of these images. You will see the project of Studio Ossidiana have a very precise reading of forms and architecture. So there is this very excuse me, my words in English are flowing away. But there's a control on the form, very strong. And on the other hand, on these images, you will see something very strong. Is what we call in French lâcher prise, le lâcher prise. So means we let go. There is something you don't control, and this comes with the presence of the animals, of the birds, and this is something that I believe is really poetic and important for us, is this presence of the animal in your projects, which give us maybe somehow a new way of looking at architecture, not directly to the form, but also to this possibility of encounter. So thank you, Alessandra.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction and for the invitation. I'm also very honored to be here today, and very excited for you, because this workshop on monsters sounds really amazing. I would love to participate myself. So, yeah, as it was mentioned, I'm Alessandra, and together with Giovanni Bellotti, the guy in the photo, we run our Studio Ossidiana, and yeah, as it was mentioned, we are based in the Netherlands, where we live and work. And we do different type of projects. We work at different scales, so from public space to public art to interiors. We design playgrounds like this one that is close to Utrecht. And different types of elements for public space. So this one, for example, is a kitchen, playground, garden, barbecue in Chicago. We also designed a public building, like this museum on water in Almere, which is near Amsterdam. And we do a lot of different installations. Sometimes are temporary, sometimes are permanent. And this is called the seedbed on the Certosa Island in Venice, and is one of the examples. And as it was mentioned, in our practice, we have been working a lot with spaces and objects that mediate our relation with other species, with animals, with plants, with minerals. And so basically the question, in fact, raised by the workshop, which is centered around monsters, not as terrifying creatures, but as figures of otherness, resonates very closely with our work. And it was already a little bit mentioned, but truly one of the texts that comes back more often in our practice and in our teaching, we also teach in Rotterdam and in Geneva, is a famous essay by Bruno Latour, Love Your Monsters. And in fact, in this essay, Latour reminds us that Frankenstein, a creature, did not become monstrous because it was born evil. On the contrary, became monstrous because it was abandoned. So because its creator refused to take the responsibility for what he had brought to the world. So monsters says a lot about us. They remind us that we must take care of the beings, the technologies, the environments that we design, so we cannot simply create, design, and withdraw. So in that sense, monsters are really warnings about responsibility. And before presenting our projects, our work, I wanted also to mention a beautiful book. I would really recommend it. I don't know if it's in French, but for sure there are readings or essays that you can find. And it's a wonderful book by a landscape architect and ordinary professor in Rome called Annalisa Metta. And in Italian, the title of the book is Il paesaggio è un mostro, which means the landscape such a monster. And she is really challenging the familiar idea of the landscape as something serene, harmonious, or good by nature, as a sort of beautiful painting. Instead, she proposes an idea of the landscape as a monster, so a space made of incongruities, hybrids, ruptures, stridencies, and she says that it is precisely in this imperfection that lies its vitality, its promise, its fertility. It is in the unexpected that new forms of life and meaning emerge. And she also offers a wonderful definition of monsters. Monsters are inevitably complex, controversial, multiple, paradoxical, cannot be reduced to unity or to coherence or to simplifications. So, like, for example, if you think at the sirens who tempt Odysseus not with the threat of destruction, but actually with the offer of knowledge, he tempts him with the promise of expanding his understanding of the world. So monsters really speak of our longing for surprise, for the irrational, for pleasure, uncertainty. And another thing that I really love about the book is that Annalisa Metta talks about the word monster, and is like and the etymology of this word is really fascinating because in Latin monstrum does not have today's negative meaning. It means actually a prodigy, so an extraordinary phenomenon, and it shares its root with the Latin verb monere, to warn, and monstrare, to reveal, to make visible. So this means that monsters are also signs, they're messengers, they belong also to the lexicon of ancient divination, so the prodigium, the portentum. So they address the future, they warn us, and in a way they guide us. And while I was preparing this presentation, I realized that very often we describe our projects as chimeras, so as human, animal, botanical, mineral chimeras. And like with this, we also try to address the different forms of coexistence, but also the richness of the complication and contradictions of these relations. And so over time, we've been accumulating many projects, materials, models, prototypes, and sometimes we think of ourselves almost as guardians of a flock of creatures that needs to be tended, repaired, and cared for, especially when we have all these projects like models that travel from an exhibition to another one, or when these projects are designed for public space, they're meant to be appropriated by people, plants, and birds, but then it means that they also need to be gardened, to be looked after, whether by us, by the clients, or by the curators, who have to commit and have to take the responsibility of maintaining these living ecosystems. So I understand that you will be, in January, spending some time imagining, building, performing, and filming monsters like models, and I really hope that the presentation will help you during the process. So this first part was more like, since it was about monster, I really wanted to read back a little bit, and also Henry and Lea were so generous to share with me the interview with Latour, so that was also super inspiring. And now I have a part that is more about our projects. And so I will show you a collection of experimental public spaces, a playground, a research on spaces and objects that mediates our relation with birds, and a pavilion made of earth and of sea, and if you have time, also a traveling garden. So But can you hear me or understand, or I have to speak more slowly? No, okay, all good, great. So I will just drink a little bit. So the first project is called Amsterdam Allegories, and it is a very important project for our practice because in a way it was the beginning of the studio and the beginning of a certain themes and a method of work. And it's also a prize that won the Dutch Prix de Rome, which is like for architecture in 2018. And actually it's a French prize that, actually it's not, it's a Dutch prize now, but it's a prize that was started by Napoleon here in France and then brought to the Netherlands. And there it still exists as the most ancient prize for young architects and artists. And the Prix de Rome is not a typical architectural competition where you propose something that has to be built, but it's more a call for experimental, speculative proposals grounded in the context of the Netherlands. So there was a jury, and the jury selected a site called 6-7, and 6-7 is in Amsterdam, so I don't know, okay, you see it very badly. Well, it doesn't matter. So I don't know if you've ever been to Amsterdam, but if you've been to Amsterdam, maybe you have been to the Amsterdam Central Station, and just opposite to the Central Station, if you look north, so over the canal, there is 6-7, which is this kind of triangular piece of land that, no, you don't see it. And it's really fascinating because it's a perfect triangular shape, and it was a lock of what is called the Noord-Holland Canal, and was connecting the port of Amsterdam with the north of the Netherlands. And this eye canal, for centuries, has been not the facade of the city, but has been the port, where everything, also from the colonies, got in. And 6-7, therefore, like for centuries, was this kind of portal to the rest of the world. And today there are many transformations in Amsterdam. So the Amsterdam that we all know, like the Amsterdam of the canals, has been expanding south, like for many centuries. Now Amsterdam is expanding north. So like basically there is this canal called Eye, and then after that there is the northern part of Amsterdam. And what this Dutch architect called Piet Bloem predicted is that this canal will become the Grand Canal of Amsterdam. So 6-7, it's right in the middle of this transformation, being on the other side of the station. So basically the question, it's a pity that the image doesn't show, but for us, the question was, okay, what are we going to put at the center, the geographical center of this new city around the Eye? So what we imagined was a place for new experimental public spaces, and in a way a new type, a civic port that would host a fleet of 21 floating islands, docked within 6-7, but also free of being transported and anchored within Amsterdam territory. So here, you see a little bit of the triangle, and then you see all these islands that move around. And so we imagine these islands as places to explore and cultivate, where to cook, climb, or bathe. So we really wanted to create something that would be an alternative, not necessarily a critique, to the supposedly neutral vocabulary of public spaces. So in the Netherlands, it seems to live in a manual of urbanism. Everything is perfect. There are parks, benches, and trees everywhere. But then, we wanted to challenge a little bit this, and we wanted to propose something that could be more experimental, where also friction could happen. And so we started imagining each island as an embassy of other Amsterdams. So not only the Amsterdam of the canals, but also the Amsterdam of the port, of the warehouses, of the polders, so the Amsterdam of the past. So we came across the Baroque Lusthoven, which were pleasure gardens, for sure inspired by Versailles, gardens along the River Vecht. It's all good. Yeah, now I think I don't have any more images, any more drawings, but let's see. Okay, anyway, so we were looking at a different type of contexts, so like this Baroque Lusthoven, but also contemporary elements of the port, where we could find all this kind of heap of coal, sand, or metal scraps that would compose contemporary landscapes, like especially third natures, and the architecture of chimneys, of warehouse, logistical centers. So we started designing and thinking and building all these models of the islands in our studio, and each one started becoming a project in itself. And the project is called Amsterdam Allegories, because in fact every island is an allegory of the city, telling stories of Amsterdam's past and present, and maybe pointing out something about the future. And an allegory, like as I'm sure you know, is a rhetorical figure in which one image reveals another meaning, a little bit like the monster. So also the allegory, like the monster, has this kind of revelatory character. And one of the first islands we designed was a black mountain, and it was thought as a floating embassy of the coal peaks in the port, but also as a site for barbecues and for campfires, or a palace of water that was dedicated to swimming on the Eye. That was a memory of the Obelt bathhouse, and this translation was a bit more literal. So an open-air pool that, like the Obelt bathhouse, used to be an open-air pool on the north shores of the Eye. And here, or in our project, will become a place where to swim with fishes and plants, or a floating Turkish bath, which is heated by the collective effort of 7 independent fires, a garden for agricultural, spontaneous, and ornamental plants, but also with a cultural and botanical intersection, inspired both by the Lusthoven, these pleasure gardens of the Golden Age I showed you before, but also by the many third landscapes of the north. A palace of metals, elevating recycling to a civic ritual, 3 pastoral islands inhabited by ships that would be herded by boat from one island to the next to transform grasslands into lawns. And then there were many other islands. And through those, we started imagining 6-7 as a place of smells, the smell of earth and fermenting cereal that would mix with the fumes of the barbecues. And another thing is that we somehow we feel that, I mean, in the Netherlands there are so many canals and water is everywhere, but we feel that water is a little bit given for granted. So for us it was important that the islands would be like really accessible only by boat. And we started seeing water as a democratic surface, an unknown territory for everybody, where there are no beaten paths, where rules are relative to one's agility or to the weather. And like we see water a little bit like when we go to the mountains and we say hi. Like when you meet, like where you are in open water, you say hi to the people on the other boat. So there is it's a completely different realm. And then we started thinking of the islands as places where different people can cross paths, but also where people could meet other species, where to cultivate a more nuanced relation with nature, where to meet embassies of the territory we are part of, so that are also made by fluxes of water, the roots of migratory birds, ephemeral heaps and materials on the shores, or forgotten elements of the city's architecture. And here you can see one of the islands moving around the city that was creating unexpected and estranging encounter with other figures of the landscape. I don't know if you recognize the building behind. It's the Silo Dam by MVRDV that is also on the shores of the Eye. So we really, yeah, this actually is a photo, but I will tell you something about this later. So we really like this. So we like this. I mean, and here there is the same mountain meeting the relative, like the real version of the coal heaps in the port. And somehow, like, there are all these kind of new forms of sublime that start emerging in these waters. So with this project, we wanted to celebrate the messiness of the shore over the sanitized slickness of the waterfront. And we wanted to celebrate a city where we are not only users or consumers, but we are sailors, we are gardeners, we are farmers, collectors, cartographers, or explorers. So a place where to invent different ways of being a citizen. And I'm showing this project also because I understood that in January you will be doing a lot of models and then take videos. And even though I'm like here, I didn't take videos, but these one are some images of the process, because what we did was for us also like a project of representation, and that's why I was saying that was also the beginning of a method. So we used our cast models, and we really explored them as photographers, getting really inside, because we placed the models into a sort of pond with plants and with different lights. We even lit a little fire with a match to take all these kind of different atmospheric photos. And yeah, this one was just like to show you, like, because I'm very curious of the images that you will be taking or the films that you will be making of these models. So now we, like from Amsterdam, we go to Stockholm, and a few years ago we were invited to work on an installation for ArcDes. And ArcDes is the Swedish National Museum for Design and Architecture. And the name of the project is very difficult. We took months to learn it. It's called Utomhusverket, and it refers to things done in public space. And it's also the name of the summer program of the museum. And they asked us to design a public space for the summer, because it was during the pandemic. So the museum was closed, and they wanted to do their activities outside. And ArcDes is this yellow building in the back, and is on this beautiful museum island called Skepsolmen, together with the other museums of the city. And it's a super beautiful island. And this one was a bit the context. So we were surrounded by Calder and Picasso sculptures, so we were very intimidated. But this one was the site itself. So it was just a tarmac asphalt surface that was used as a parking lot. And it was 2020, so like we couldn't visit the site. And so we started working from a distance. And then we started envisioning the project as a map, as a mineral garden of intersecting elements that is inhabited by plants, loose materials, artificial rocks. And it was a little bit like a foreign world that sprouted from the tarmac of the square. And we drew it as a small planet, following the dusk and dawns of the summer solstice, as well as the dusk range during summer. So it became an inhabitable solar calendar. And yeah, for us it's also very important to work across different scales. When we mean that is also like we love to hint also at planetary relations, also to suggest that yeah, we are not alone on the planet, that we are part of something way bigger. And we imagine it as a civic stage for urban but also horticultural rituals in the city. So you could go there and dig or get your feet wet, pick a flowers or some berries. You could play games, give speeches or lectures. And here it's a circle, and it's like, yeah, so the most modest action in the center becomes a performance. And many of our projects are somehow gardens, and are made by the sum of multiple elements. And here the project was framed by a pink wave between the edge of a garden and a petrified chaiselong. So it's a place to sit, but also to lay or to run. And this small, like this kind of green element is an oblique sundial facing the sun, where to lay in the summer. It was also intersected by an inaccessible garden. It was a sort of embassy of the Swedish forest, but only accessible for birds. For us, was also a little bit a play on the paradox of wilderness, the genre of nature that we treasure the most because we think we are not part of it. And so this one was yeah, we could only we could only peek through as humans, so it was not possible to enter. And then the interior was dotted by a series of man-made rocks, like platform for games, the backgammon, and many others. And then the idea was that we wanted this one to be a playground for humans and birds, but then, of course, if working with birds, you never know, that are creatures that fly, you never know if they will come or not. We also spoke with an ornithologist that, in fact, suggested to create this garden, which, in fact, initially we called the bird palace, but in the end, you will see what happened. So we designed all these perches that were a little bit structures in between structures for play and resting spots for birds. And they're also casting shadows on the ground. and this aspect of shadows for us is important because birds really read the shadows because they can read the shadow of birds of prey and so on. So we like the fact that it would become a projected language. And at the center there was a mirror of water reflecting the sky and the surrounding. So beside the composition, let's say that some small but very important things happened and that we didn't expect during the summer. So almost immediately the installation was discovered by the birds of the museum island and understood as an open buffet, a sort of all-you-can-eat. Because from that perspective, the whole project was a sort of inhabitable dish, because the floor had seashells that are part of their diet because they supply calcium. We planted the bulbs of water plants that then turned out to be an out-of-season delicacy, so we never saw the plants growing in the water. And so birds really started regarding all the space as a sort of spa where to dry in the sun or bath in the waters. And then soon it also became a sort of nursery or kindergarten for goslings, while the bird perches and feeders were occupied by a flock of seagulls, very protective, that used them as vantage point because they were looking and caring at their chicks. Also, the museum was capitalizing on the cuteness of the situation, organizing and taking photos of a yoga session with the chicks. And the museum curators, since it was COVID and also in Sweden they're really overstaffed, they were just turning into bird keepers. And so somehow they were really the seagulls, but then also other geese. So we were a little bit worried of what would happen because we were afraid the seagulls would attack the other chicks. But what was interesting is that the curators were sending us updates, and everybody was quite astonished of what was happening. And these photos here is only to demonstrate that there were also people and kids playing around, but this presentation is really focusing on the birds. And then we returned to Stockholm at the end of the summer, and we were very happy to discover that the pristine Swedish forest had escaped its mandate of imaginary wilderness, becoming home to these huge sunflowers that probably were sprouted by the salty snacks, the sunflower seeds that we probably bought at the 7-Eleven, and during installations we, probably dispersed them in the garden. And then some of the most beautiful moments were really at the end of the seasons when the plants had settled, the soils had mixed. So we started seeing the project as a project of cultivation, where materials and textures will change over time and the mineral meets the organic. And so this space really became the negotiation, a stage of negotiations between curators, the public, and all the many birds. As I was mentioning, there were a very few protective geese and gulls that tried to intimidate visitors. Cleaning up was quite some work. So at a certain point, the geese would have the space in the evening, but the morning was reserved for yoga classes. So somehow, certain things turned out incompatible. And another thing happened that is quite crazy. So one of the curators in July was tasked with moving a gull chick, so a seagull chick that foaled from the perch. So it was tasked to place it, bring it to a safe spot on the islands. But the seagulls did not forget. So for a few months, he had to enter the museum wearing a hoodie and just from the back entrance. Otherwise, he would be attacked by many seagulls. So all this gave a completely different notions and meaning to the word curation, or maybe it actually stressed its true meaning. And here we go a little bit back to Latour, so to curate in the sense of taking care of things, and becoming gardeners here meant really to take care of the human and non-human population of Automusberget, negotiating between the different desires of different species and adjusting every day depending on the events. So the project comes with a responsibility. This is what I meant at the beginning, and I think this project shows it a little bit. And this video, I really love it because it seems like Italian families going to the beach in the summer. And then this avian incursion was not the first one, as I mentioned, as it was mentioned several times. For a while, we've been interested in spaces like aviaries, zoos, but also bird feeders, cages, dovecotes, but even traps. So bird cages in an expanded sense. So what we did was to start to collect, design, and sometimes modify or reinterpret the models of these cages. So we started looking at these spaces as mediative objects, as a built language that talks about our relation with birds. And then we were fascinated by birds because, I mean, for different reasons. I mean, from one side, like we are genetically separated by millions of years of evolution, but we are also like extremely close. So also birds, like us, are vectors of globalization. They disperse seeds. They are everywhere on the planet. They contribute to the globalization of nature. But they're also in our metaphors, in our myth, in our diet, and probably in our language, because music might have preceded the language, and the imitation of birds probably preceded music. So somehow they might be really within us, within our voice, but also incredibly remote. And for a while, we've been collecting stories of spaces, of architectural types that you can see in this book. That only are the menagerie in Versailles, because actually, I wanted to show a slide, but then I forgot to put it. But one of the first zoos were actually the menagerie in Versailles, where was a typology a bit like the panopticon. So it is said that the panopticon was inspired by the menagerie in Versailles, with the zookeeper at the center and all the cages around. And so we've been collecting all these different stories, or like architectural types actually, and then we've been translating them into models and as a new special types. So sometimes more literally, sometimes mediated by our imagination, sometimes they were like just our own designs. So this book is, I mean, finally we have a publisher. It's ages we're working on it because we keep finding material, but hopefully it's going to come to be published next year. And one of our obsessions are pigeon towers, and also because they exist in different epochs, in different cultures, and it's a small-scale architecture that took many different forms and languages depending on the context. It was this kind of whimsical architecture that in every country had a completely different form. But we're also fascinated because, like by pigeons, because the Columbia livia domestica was the earliest bird to be domesticated, probably in Egypt 10,000 years ago. So it's a bird and an architectural type that is tied to human survival at a planetary scale, because before Haber and Bosch developed a system to artificially fix nitrogen in 1910, pigeons were kept not only for their meat, but for their guano, because their guano was the main source for fertilizers and explosives. So it means that human growth and worth were tied to pigeons and birds. But also, the other side is that pigeons are animals that are completely designed by us, and or at least domesticated, but today are somehow unnecessary, are kept for racing or display, but mainly regarded as a sort of urban nuisance. So pigeons are, like we always think, that are somewhat our Frankensteins, because are domesticated by us, but they're not loved anymore, and therefore they're abandoned and now seen as a pest. So maybe we should find ways to love them again. And another extremely interesting example, which is definitely monstrous, is an architectural type called roccolo, and are structures that have been in Italy used from the 14th century to capture living migratory birds. Are beautiful gardens, if you see in these photos, but are actually weaponized landscapes. And what happens is that a singing bird is usually used to attract other birds to these gardens, and then in the hedges of the garden there are nests. And when birds arrive to this garden, like the hunter scares them with a decoy, and then the birds just escape in the hedges with the nets and get caught. So it's obviously a very violent object, but somehow is oddly contemporary, And it's a sort of chimera of architectural, botanical, zoological parts that work together as one entity. So on one side, it's cruel, but it also speaks of a certain empathy, because to design such an effective environment to attract birds, it really requires observing, getting close, thinking like a bird. So yeah, like we're always fascinated by this kind of different contradictions, and we feel that these different contradictions are also what are expressed by by this concept of monsters. And going on, then I started showing like a few other build projects, but this research for us is fundamental, because otherwise, it's really the ground to our build work. We also discovered that in Republican Rome there were architectural aviaries, and Lucullus, which is a very famous, at least in Italy, Roman general, is really famous for this self-indulgence, lavish banquet. In fact, in Italian we say cene luculliane, Lucullian dinners, to say something extremely decadent and lavish. And apparently he had an architectural aviary in Tusculum where he used to invite guests and then inside the aviary, and then serve them with a bird dish buffet, while alive birds would be flying around, deposit their guano, so you can imagine the situation. And Varro, his contemporary, basically reported that many of these guests, after this culinary zoological experience, would basically become vegetarian. So not using this word, but that was the sense. But also Varro himself, which is the author of De Rustica, also describes his own aviary in Casinum. And what is beautiful is that, and I didn't know, I didn't expect, but also in ancient Rome there were all these kind of architectural, pleasure-like aviary gardens. So there were small architectural jewels. And also many architects were fascinated by those or by the detailed descriptions of these aviaries, and they started representing them. So apparently there were sedilia avium, like bird seats within the columns. There was a portico cage hosting songbirds. So the whole project was thought as an auditorium for birds. It was also designed and oriented towards the stars. And so I really love that this reference gives architectural dignity to a type like the aviary, but is also full of contradiction, because it's a place where birds were celebrated in a way as companions and singers, but they were also confined, caged, and humans remained firmly at the center. So in a way, it's also sort of panopticon. And then we had many other references and models. So as I understood, we did a lot of research and models. And then when the budget grew, we also started designing bigger installations. And here is a tribute to pigeons in Venice at the Giardino delle Vergini during the Architecture Biennale. So it's this kind of metallic feathered object that is echoing the city's bell tower, and is really dressed like a bird, or at least a pigeon, with a big gutter and bird feet overseeing a flock of Venetian pigeons, but also offering shelter to other urban birds. And we thought of it as a sort of Trojan horse for pigeons, and a tribute to the pigeons in Venice. So for a long time, tourists in Venice were giving food to pigeons, and then preservation committees were furious, and they hated pigeons. And here, to be honest, we didn't see many pigeons. I think we had a lot of competitions from Cicchetti in Venice or other bars. But somewhat, it's a project that then also traveled, was also installed in Luxembourg, and this somehow is the destiny of many of our projects. So many times we have to take care of these projects in that sense. And part of this fascination for birds is also because we live with two birds, and one of them is our parrot Coco, that you can see here. And it's a 6-year-old Amazon oratrix from Rijswijk, close to Delft. And here, I really love this photo because it really looks like Coco with his real estate empire behind. So we started designing, again during COVID, hybrid furniture for him and us. And this is a variation on Windsor benches designed to accommodate us together, perching and sitting on it. Some chairs with elongated backrest so you can sit while we work or eat, or a perch coat hanger that is Coco's favorite object, and he keeps eating it, not destroying it with his beak, and then we keep repairing it almost every month. And another project, sorry, I thought this was a video, is called the Bird Palace, and is a floating island for birds and bird watchers in Vondelpark, which is the main park of Amsterdam, and is a sort of Lusthof for bird, so a very exclusive place, only accessible by air or water, and it's dotted by perches and bird feeders with abstract nesting beaks and bellies filled with seeds. And with this project, we really wanted to celebrate birds as gardeners, which in fact they are. So they are fertilized. So the project is basically a heap of soil, and then all these kind of seeds on the feeders and the perches, and then birds by eating the soils, the seeds, dispersing the seeds, or like with their guano, they fertilize the island, becoming the gardeners of the place. While visitors will be looking at the island and its inhabitant with cameras or binoculars from the shore. And they would also be looked back through a sort of inverted panopticon. Sorry, maybe this is my phone. No, it's not. So what I was saying is that, for us it's really important to explore this kind of different degrees of proximity with between humans and other species. And in this case, we see this project a little bit as an inverted panopticon, where people are observed by the birds, and where people are not absent, but are not at the center of the map. And then again, taking care of these perches, we installed them a few times. So the project in Amsterdam was temporary, and was floating, and the pontoons were rented. But then the perches, we invested on the perches, and then we reinstalled them a few times. And this one was at Rotterdam Biennale, and was quite funny that in the port of Rotterdam, where the Biennale was, it was colonized by a quite rough crowd of crows and pigeons, very different from the posh birds and Egyptian geese of Vondelpark, of the center of Amsterdam. And another project I would like to show is called the Earthy Pavilion, and was a project for the Bruges Triennial, a festival of architectural pavilions. So it's really focused on pavilions of architecture. And our pavilion is called Earthy, and it was installed in the courtyard of Bloodline, a palace of the 15th century that in the past used to be a Bank of the Medici. And so with this project, we wanted to pay tribute to the materials of land and sea. So we started looking at the history of Bruges. And I don't know if you know Bruges, but it's this kind of beautiful, almost super picturesque, UNESCO-like medieval village. Perfect, almost Disneyfied. And so in this context, we started looking at the old port in Bruges, because Bruges was connected to the port at medieval time, and was a very important town for the Hanseatic League. And so we started looking at all these different layers of the historical cities. There was a beautiful building like the water hall. There was a piece of architecture that brought inside the city the fluxes of water and made it civic. But Bruges is not connected anymore to the sea, doesn't have a port anymore because of all the sediments. And then there is a new port actually, but it's called Zeebrugge, so it's way far away. And then we started looking at this type of materials. So we wanted to bring at the center of the city an embassy of its expanded territory and materials. So, I mean, this is also coming after Amsterdam and Lagos, so we have this kind of fascination for all this kind of heap of materials and the loose materials we find in the port, so like from the charcoal to soils, to sands, to shells, and so on, but also we were thinking at the agricultural fields all around and so on. So we started imagining a pavilion made of turf, a tempietto dedicated to the soils in the courtyard of Bloodline. And we started thinking of a botanical variation on Bramante tempietto in San Pietro in Montorio. So we started thinking at the world of architecture within architectures, because this is a site, so we were within a courtyard. So a tempietto of land and sea within this kind of mineral walls of the courtyard. And we wanted to work with soft materials in this kind of silos of turf. And it became a contemporary chimera made of mineral, plants, animals, organic matter, fungi, and bacteria that becomes this kind of strange living organism. And looking back at the project, it makes me think at the definition of Earth, of Gaia, as this kind of living being and as a sum. So Henri and Lea shared this interview with Bruno Latour, as I was mentioning, where he was also talking about Gaia as a sum. So I really love this. So Gaia as a sum of lands and heterogeneous terrains, but also like a monster, a chimera. So when I read the sentence, I immediately felt like a closeness to it. And anyway, going on, we usually think that architecture hosts life within its walls, like here. But in the Earthsea Pavilion, we really wanted to imagine an architectural fragment where the building itself would be alive, the walls themselves would be alive. And it was built as an ancient Roman muro sacco, like rubble masonry. So a formwork of steel filled with different loose materials. And here you can see a slide with the different layers. So we started from loam, which is basically clay. And then there were basically it was from heavy to light. So loam and pot ground, shells, expanded clay, biochar, sphagnum, and leaves. And then all these different layers were seeded, and the mixtures were studied with a team of landscape architects and gardeners. So the project started becoming a collection of horizontal ecologies. And over time, the pavilion transformed, and the plants grew while the different layers were settling. And in some parts, there were like miniature jungles. Here, probably, we had a sort of leakage of water. And they were mixing, creating new soil. And I really love this image where you see the loam that is almost coming outside the grid. And the visitors also started appropriating the project in a way we couldn't expect, creating compositions with shells in the soft loam. And this reminded us a bit the grottos of ancient Rome or Renaissance decorated with shells. And so while we were building it, we started in a way drawing and filling this wall, thinking of a sort of imaginary geology of Bruges. But then when the materials began to layer, we realized it became more of a painting or a tapestry, where the soil defined a landscape of heaps with rolling hills or plants emerging in the distance. So a sort of diorama made of soil. And then the floor was covered in shells, adding to the acoustic of the space, and also adding a certain kind of smell, because all of a sudden you could really smell the sea from the streets of Bruges nearby. And then it was also kids were collecting shells and so on. So through this project, we really wanted to see architecture as a form of gardening, of maintenance and care, a project that would continue over time, and also where new roles, authors, and responsibilities step in to take care of it and maintain it. And if I have time for the last project, it's quite quick. And from Bruges, we go to Istanbul, and it's a project called Buyukada Songlines. And it's a floating garden that we designed for the Istanbul Design Biennial, again between 2020 and 2021, so during COVID. And the project had many different iterations, many different complications. I'm still incredibly astonished that we managed to do it, actually, because it was really this kind of floating garden that traveled between the waters of Marmara, so from the Princess Islands that you can see in this slide over there, that are in front of the Asian coast of Istanbul, and they traveled to the Golden Horn that you can also see in the image. And it was inspired by Ottoman floating pavilions, but also by Venetian theaters floating on water, in Baroque times, obviously by Aldo Rossi, Teatro del Mondo, that was this symbol of the first Biennale of Architecture in Venice in the 80s, created by Portoghesi, but also by Robert Smithson's proposal for a floating island that was realized only after his death, floating around Manhattan. So for us, what was important was really this kind of tradition that belonged more to water than to a specific culture or place. So for us, what was powerful was not just the spatial archetype, so the ship, the island, but for us was really a device for narration. So a tradition of stories told on water, from Homer to Conrad to Stevenson to Le Guin, but also Aldo Rossi, Robert Smithson, and so on. And these islands, the Princess Islands, I don't know if you've ever been to Istanbul, but if you would go, like, I would really recommend you to visit them, have always been places of exile and retreat, inhabited for millennia. And so were places of voluntary and involuntary exile for humans, but also for other species. And really, in these islands, we started imagining Buyukada songlines. Echoing in the title is also a quotation of Chatwin songlines, the diaries of the original songlines, which where he describes other definition of territories that emerge not as lines on a map, but through the knowledge of stories, of music, of plants and minerals, and so on. So the project is both, obviously an architectural project or like design project, but for us, the main project was actually the journey itself, and the fact that the project was a device for narration, traveling across the Princess Island. And during the travel, it carried plants, soils, insects, it collected materials, it hosted conversation, events, dancing classes, and also some non-human passengers, so gulls and crows. There were butterflies and bees taking a passage from island to island. And I'm still astonished that we managed to do it, because it was a sort of combination of parts. So Istanbul municipality could give us for free like a barge because it was COVID, so they were not using them, but also towing boat. So we didn't have to pay for this, and we didn't have to pay for also mooring, that is usually very expensive. So it was a sort of miracle, let's say. And like while traveling, it became a sort of traveling observatory. And this one are some images of the trip. So we left Buyukada, and this one is an island called Neandros, presented as uninhabited, but was home to a huge colony of cormorants. And then here we see Libeliada, that is a source of copper since Roman times. Sivriada, where in the 1911, 80,000 dogs were taken from Istanbul and abandoned on these islands, so leaving them to die in exile. Or another one where actually, like in the 60s, politicians and academics were trialed and sentenced. So also this island was a place for exile from Byzantine times. And then here is when we arrived finally in the Golden Horn, in the Bosphorus, and we moored in the Golden Horn before returning to Buyukada, leaving behind all the plants and the installations that are now permanently installed in Buyukada's gardens. And thank you. And I have a video that I leave of the journey for the questions. It's finished. Unless you want to see the video.
Thank you very much for this really interesting lecture and all these amazing images. Does anyone have some questions? Normal, oui. Ouais, c'est bon.
There is a question.
Est-ce que quelqu'un aurait des questions? Oui.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I had a question to your last project in Istanbul. Like, was it you who chose to make this barge, kind of, or is the barge for you also some kind of metaphor for like some island, something isolated, some utopia, or does it have? Do you know what I mean?
But maybe are those two questions or one?
It was one.
Was one. I mean, it's a project that started in a very strange way because the curator of the Istanbul Design Biennial actually invited us to show the bench for us and Coco, and then we just said, okay, we would like to do something different, and we managed to fundraise to do this project. So I think it came at a time when that Istanbul Biennial was a bit, not really a disaster, but it really never really could open to the public. And then for us what was important was to create this kind of traveling device, also that could travel in different places while having people moving. But to be honest, it was also like a dream, or something that we really wanted to do, because it came after Amsterdam Allegories. And then after Amsterdam Allegories, we did a project on the Princess Island about studying a lot of architectural types that used to be there and they used to be floating or used to be related to the water and are not there anymore. So we did a small exhibition with models there, and then this occasion came. So I don't know. I think it was not. So we really didn't want to create an utopia, or I don't know. I'm thinking at this. Italian platform in the sea. There was also the movie. Now I don't remember anymore the name. And still. Of course, I mean, what we would like to do though is we have a lot of a lot of recording, and we would love actually to look back at it and create a sort of parallel narrative. For us at the moment was really also collaboration with a series of NGO of the site and of the island, and it was a space for where there were radio recordings, a place for conversations, a place for people were diving from the platform. It was really this kind of device of a narration. That is how we really framed it and how we imagined it. So a platform where we could really have presentations and talk about the topics of the very water they were representing. So there were ecologists talking on the barge while the water was full of mucilagine, or while people talking about coral transplantation. That is a global theme, but it was also very specific to the place. So it was framed more in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you too for the presentation. I was curious, when we're talking about monsters, what one thinks about often is not only something that's non-normative, but maybe something too that is threatening or imposing itself. I'm curious, for you, is it the architecture or the object or the space itself that is monstrous, or is it what it invites? Is it the non-anthropocenic part? It's an open question. It's a question on because it's so playful, many of the objects in the architecture, and so it is in a way non-threatening, but then it invites things that are out of our control. So I thought maybe you had reflected on it more than I had.
No, that's a very beautiful question. Also because, I mean, usually I don't, this introduction, I did it specifically because there was this theme of monsters. And then, I really wanted to dive a little bit more into it and think a little bit more about it myself. But then, of course, there are a lot of connections. And I think, if I go back maybe to what Annalisa Metta was saying about this landscape as a monster, is maybe it's not really a matter of beauty, because I mean sirens are super beautiful, but and or like are imagined as, then you never like in different mythologies are completely different. But what she says is that like the landscape as a monster, like and she talks about this kind of places that where there is still the possibility of that are not completely finished, that are not that they can still be in a way appropriated, changed, transformed. There is a lot about metamorphosis and or in our case like appropriation. So it's true that there is a little bit this like in our work, like for example, Utumusverket, it's like designed. I mean, there was also this kind of like you were saying that it's quite formal and so on. But then it has a certain openness, and for us, it's really all about like the things that are happening there. Even though, like we frame this garden, there are loose materials inside, and like the different materials or the different things inside, the water or the shells and so on, start creating all these kind of frictions. So I think that the monstrosity or like landscapes as monster is a lot about frictions that we wouldn't expect. And I think also like for the Prix de Rome from Amsterdam Allegories, it's a little bit what I said before, like this kind of desire for the unexpected. So what we try to do is to design as much as possible canvases that are not neutral, absolutely, like are very designed, but then that can leave still spaces for imagination or appropriation and so on. So I don't know if this answers, but...
Yes, it does. And if I can just, when you're talking, it makes me think about, I haven't read the book from Annalisa Mehta, but Yuval Price talks about, he was one of the first to talk about the picturesque and how the landscape is not... when you're painting a landscape, what we're looking for is the rugged, is the unfinished, not the beautiful concentration of bushes or a perfect house. It is that something is rotten or dead, and the translation of that then becomes that maybe something that is from the beginning pristine. Because by a chance I was working next to the Utomhusverket in Stockholm when I was there, and I remember that it started out as this pristine circle, perfectly placed, and as the birds came, slowly the white sand started to kind of become. So I mean, the birds had their ways with the sand. They shat in the sand. They brought in other objects. So it started to live by itself. And so then, maybe I'm searching for a response to my own question. Then it became something picturesque or something more of a monster when they start to inhabit it.
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah, I agree. Like it's more like that, I think. So it's this part of the fact that are not just canvases to look at, but this kind of interaction or this action that happens inside. Like it's basically the most important part of the project is all the appropriation. And in fact, we see a lot of times the projects as tools, so are instruments. So we never know what can really happen. So maybe what I wanted to say before, like was, or maybe I don't know if I said it or not, but the ornithologist was obsessed with this bird garden, the green pavilion, and she said, okay, no birds will ever come to this place because it's so open. You have water all around, and so even her that knew so well birds couldn't predict what they will be doing. And then it's like there is this kind of thrill of this unpredictability. So we designed all this place, but then you never know what will actually really happen. And and I think also the sense of Annalisa Mehta landscape as a monster is a little bit that, no? Like I don't know, like maybe not seeing this, not look at this kind of manicure perfect cities, but like look at like the place where the flowers or the plants are coming out from the asphalt, or to look at this kind of other places as this kind of fertile things where life and opportunities actually happen. So, yeah, maybe.
thank you for the presentation too. And to maybe continue from this topic, I was going to ask, we are so used to anticipating people's needs, like humans' needs as architects. How do you anticipate birds' needs, or like, because it's not just your installations, but also like you're building furniture for birds. How do you anticipate what they need in design?
I think we don't really anticipate, but because we never know, and depending on different contexts, things really change. But for example, we first did models out of this research, and then like the furniture for human and for like our own parrot. And then we realized how Coco loved absolutely these perches, which are also like you see birds on antennas or like these things that are a little bit wobbly, that are a little bit resembling a tree. And Coco really loved that. And then he started eating and going up and down all the time. So we have this perch at home that is completely destroyed. And from there, we scaled it to an urban scale, and then also, of course, there are also bird feeders. So of course there is food like in Vondel Park or in Venice or like in different contexts. There is a lot of food all around, but at a certain point they start coming and they start inhabiting. So I think at the beginning, the ducks are always the one that are more courageous and curious, and are always the first one to come. But sometimes you have to wait a few months. So, for example, in Lisbon, we installed something that was inspired by the Varro aviary. I mean, it's very different from what you saw in the images, but there were also perches, and there was like a big feeder. And even though there was a lot of food, that was a delicious food for birds, they came after like 3 months. So it took some time for them to discover it and so on. So I think what is really important for us would be to have something like this, but on a permanent basis, because for the moment we have only installed them for a few months, while it would be great to have them for many years. But then we would see, because our dream, for example, for the bird palace, we designed some spots where they could even nest. But then, if it's not a nesting season, nobody will ever nest, you know. So I don't know if this answers, but we cannot really predict, I think, and because the client is flying, and but then, if we look them at tools, we can always, study them and see what happens.
Thank you.
Does someone else have some questions?
Thank you very much for this amazing lecture. I have a question, but you start to reply about it in your last sentences. I was wondering, you mentioned the maintenance and how the installation need to be maintained, and I was wondering if you had some permanent installations on site that you around that you could watch after a few months, few years, because we know well your ephemeral work. But yes, I was curious about that, and maybe also about the soil Tempietto. Is it still there? Oh, can you tell us more about maintenance and long time on your project, if it could happen?
Yeah, no, thank you for this question. No, definitely. So now we are starting to receive commissions for permanent works. So, for example, next week we are installing a project that is not officially thought for birds, but in a way, I mean, at least not to the client, but in reality, it is totally like a place for birds with all these different roofs, and so I'm sure that birds will go there. And just before coming here, I was wondering, okay, will they nest on this type of roofs or not? And that one is permanent, so let's see what will happen. We would like, since we own many of these, some of the projects, so for example, the perches of Vondel Park, we own them, and fortunately, Giovanni's family has a farm in Italy, And our dream would be to install them there, but also we need a budget, actually, because they need foundations and all these type of things. But we would love to use that one really as a site for experimentation. And now we are also commissioned another permanent work, but we are just starting. And it's an amazing, it's a national park in Belgium, and it's a very huge site with cows. And let's see what will happen. We don't know yet what we are going to design. And for the project in Bruges, I mean, actually, this is a big topic, and I was just 2 weeks ago on an event where a lot of, it was a beautiful event because a lot of different curators or triennales and biennales from different places met actually to address this theme, because they commission a lot of temporary installation that need to be sustainable, but then they cannot stay, while they would like to create a sort of network so they can maybe travel from one to another one, or they can have more funding to make it permanent, and so on. So we were really talking about these things. And for example, the project of Bruges, it was really a pity because for us it was really a sort of almost botanical experiment, but at a certain point had to go, so it's not installed anymore. And we tried to reach Wageningen, this big University of Landscape, but I mean alone, we don't have so much power, you know. On the other side, we always feel that there is a sort of material reuse, and in that sense, all the soil went back to the nursery, and they kept cultivating the plants. But the steel was, we couldn't, in the budget, we couldn't afford the stainless steel or curtain steel, so the steel was gone. So simply, it was not secure anymore. So at a certain point, we also stopped looking for places. But on the other side, there is also another aspect that is really important for us, because all these temporary events, even though you cannot maybe keep all the work, but still it really allows us to experiment. Because if there weren't these venues, I mean, we tried to propose a client to have something built like that, and of course they were super scared, and they said no. Or in the Netherlands, at least, a lot of the public space are decided basically by developers, because what you put in the public space is connected to the value of their homes. So they would be super scared of having something like Utumusverket. And also Utumusverket was temporary, and in Stockholm there was all a plan to reinstall it, so we were in discussion with the municipality, but then at a certain point they backed out. So in a way, it's great that the museums allow us, or clients, or these triennales, to experiment, even if it's for a temporary period. So there is a positive side to that, but then, of course, it would be ideal to find a way to make them be permanent or dissolve, and so on. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for showing also these models in the beginning, which will be very important and interesting for the students. I think you've shown a lot. These last words about the planners and things who will be frightened, I think, are interesting also to the question that was asked just before of this, the fact that animals, that we invite animals is not something easy, and well, we can hope that it would be multiplied. And well, I won't ask any more questions. I think it's good. We had a long time, but thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions.